Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that wants the world to know. I'm Christy Powell, and I'm joined tonight by a co-host willing to let it show. Welcome, Nate Smith.
You know it, Christy. I'm always up for a good show.
And our guest tonight is from NextQuest Counseling and the NextQuest Podcast. He's a psychotherapist and transition coach. Welcome, Noah Garcia.
Thanks, Christy. I'm Noah, and as Christy said, I am a psychotherapist. I practice as a licensed professional counselor here in Texas. I've been doing this now for about a decade, which feels crazy to say. I have my counseling practice called NextQuest Counseling, where I see clients full-time for psychotherapy. I am also what I would call a transition coach at my coaching practice, which is called Open World Coaching and Consulting. In that practice, I work with people on the how and when of transitioning from the perspective of my lived experience. And I can't emphasize enough how that is not therapy. If you have any questions about the differences between therapy and coaching, there's a good list of these on my coaching website, which is openworldcc.com. I also finance, produce, and host the podcast, NextQuest Podcast, which can be found on any major podcast provider. And regarding the podcast, every week, the podcast features a local mental health professional and their practice and specialty. I really developed it as a means of being a resource to the Austin community and helping people find a good fit in a therapist.
Yeah, and it's a good time. You and I actually got to meet when I was on that podcast. I definitely encourage people to check it out. You know, we spoke on the show recently about how difficult it can be to find a good therapist. And so I feel like that's an incredible resource for anybody who's in the Austin area or really, I imagine, anybody in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the podcast features only providers licensed in Texas who practice out of Austin, but they can see anybody from anywhere in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Busy boy.
Yes, I try to be.
All right. Well, tonight, folks, we are talking about the shields we bear and the masks we wear, but we are not LARPing. So come on out, give us a call. We want to hear your coming out stories too. So if you are watching this on YouTube, if you're listening in on Discord, give us a call and be part of the conversation. And if you want to get some advice from two mental health professionals and some random Canadian, give us a call, 512-991-9242, or on the interwebs at tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is coming right now.
All right, let's jump into it. Noah, I am excited to have you here. This is honestly a topic or a question that we get on the show all the time. We get a call almost every week that's some version of, I recently discovered or I recently became X, and I'm not sure how to tell Y about it. I don't know how to talk to my partner, my mom, my family about my gender, about my atheism. I don't know how to talk to my partner about kinks or fetishes or neurodiversity or all of these kinds of topics. So I'm curious from you, what do we actually owe to other people when it comes to like sharing these adjectives and letting other people in our lives, whether they're close and personal or just strangers, in on those labels that we carry?
Short answer to your question, Christy, is that we don't owe anyone shit. However, if disclosing that something makes our lives a little freer and a little easier, then it's definitely worth considering doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of framing it, that this is a totally optional idea. What are some of the adjectives that you've shared publicly, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, Of course, it's always good to have boundaries. I don't believe it's necessarily healthy for everyone to know every single vulnerable thing about you.
Sure.
That's true in both my personal and professional experience. But some adjectives that I do share regarding myself and are proud of are the facts that I'm queer and a non-binary trans man. Specifically, when it comes to my gender, I've come to understand that I am most comfortable with the term bigender. This was not something I realized about myself until well into my social and medical transition. And I found that the more masculine my gender presentation, the more comfortable I felt expressing my femininity. It's such a hard word. But I really enjoy being queer and feminine through a masculine lens, and that's where I'm most comfortable.
Excellent. If I can, since we're here, can you maybe walk us through just that term bigender?
Sure. So bigender is somebody who is both male and female.
Mm-hmm. Do people make kind of inaccurate assumptions about you or leap to a particular conclusion?
All the time. Most people assume that I'm a binary trans man given my gender presentation, but that's definitely inaccurate. And as far as like correcting people, the way I correct people is generally by having these conversations and explaining what it is for me, kind of like what I just did. But there's a time and a place for that. If I'm at HEB and somebody I don't know makes an inaccurate assumption about my gender, I'm not necessarily going to take the time to correct them.
Yeah, that feels like such a important piece of this. Just figuring out who you actually want to share these things with and who is allowed in and who isn't. You use that example of being at the grocery store, but in general, how do you decide who to be transparent with?
So I decided a long time ago when I started transition that I was no longer going to put up any facades about who I am. In terms of therapy and being a therapist, to me, transparency mirrors this idea of congruence as set forth by the founding father of person-centered psychotherapy, Carl Rogers. Rogers basically says that one of the three characteristics that is needed for a relationship, a client-therapist relationship, is a therapist who is congruent, real, genuine, open, and authentic in their interactions. And when I made the decision to transition, it was really centered around my clients because I felt like if I couldn't be authentic with myself, then how could I expect my clients to be authentic with me? And so within a therapeutic relationship, I'm limited because the therapy is not about me. But that doesn't mean that I still can't be myself. I'm a big fan of therapeutic self-disclosure, which, as you know, Christy, is a very fine line to walk.
It really can be. We talked about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but as a like kind of very out and loud and obnoxious atheist advocate, I wouldn't want to pretend with a client that I don't have some perhaps biases or at least some like very strongly held and passionate beliefs about the cosmos and how we got here. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can't do really beautiful work with somebody who is a theist, who has a belief in God or gods or some other magical thinking that I don't necessarily line up on. But it can be really difficult to figure out like what to share and how to be opening and inviting without necessarily scaring people off.
And so to further elaborate a little bit, that was more so aimed at like being a therapist. Regarding like my personal life, as is the nature of congruence, I am always who I am. It doesn't matter the context, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But the things I choose to disclose about myself personally will vary based on the context of the interaction and my perception of the safety of the situation. So to answer your question, safety is a big thing to take into consideration when doing any sort of vulnerable self-disclosure to others.
Yeah, that's obviously going to be a important piece of all this. And we're going to, talk a little bit later about maybe how to come out and what that process might look like, for individuals and different things. But I know that one of the barriers that we hear about on this show frequently is well, I know that I'm gay. My mother knows that I'm gay. My partner knows that I'm gay, but I'm not really allowed to tell my family until my grandmother passes. Or for some reason, I have to wait and, and try to avoid letting my dad know, or these kinds of things. And I guess I am curious about that level of masking and choosing to keep these things secret and how to navigate that. I mean, what sort of insight can you offer somebody who is being pressured in those ways?
I mean, I think when it comes to coming out, you have to do what's best for you. Um, and as I just talked about, a big variable in this is the idea of safety, and that includes things like emotional safety, financial safety, physical safety, to name a few. Um, if you determine that you really feel like you need to come out to your family, your mom is saying don't come out to your dad, but you just really feel like you need to in order to have an authentic relationship with him, then in my opinion, you've got to do what you've got to do.
It's not about them, it's about you, is
Right.
what I'm hearing.
Right.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and it's worth really, I think, highlighting that safety piece. Not only because it's incredibly important, but it's worth remembering and maybe acknowledging to a wider audience. I don't have statistics in front of me, but the homelessness rate among trans teenagers and trans adults is absolutely staggering. I mean, I know I saw it on Facebook just today, another friend of mine asking or soliciting donations for a acquaintance who is trans and was kicked out of their home because of these kinds of issues, because of that choice to be transparent. And I never want to stifle anybody who feels like there is a need to come out, or like they don't have a choice but to come out, while also wanting to really let the audience know that there are huge swaths of our society that are being kicked out of their homes that I feel like maybe a lot of cis folks aren't aware of.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that, well, I mean, it happens in the LGBTQIA plus population with much more frequency than the rest of the population. I don't know the exact statistics, but I have read that. And yeah, I mean, it's awful. And I don't think that many people are necessarily aware of those sorts of repercussions that people face just for wanting to be themselves.
Mhm. Do you have any insight you might offer for knowing when or how to draw that line? If there is something inside of you that feels like it needs to be expressed, that you are eager to be transparently and loudly and proudly yourself, how do you know which risks to take?
I mean, I think the risks that you take are the ones that, well, hold on. Let's go back to what I talked about earlier regarding like self-disclosure and safety.
Mhm.
So regarding safety, if you know the potential risks and you feel this pressure inside of you to come out, and it goes back to living a little freer and more with more ease, then you've got to do what you've got to do, and you just have to unfortunately accept those consequences, but maybe do a little pre-planning. Maybe you get a second job and start saving up some more money and put a little stash away in anticipation of coming out and potentially being kicked out and needing to get your own place. There are things we can do to mitigate some risk, but not all risk. If you're going to come out to somebody who has a history of aggression, for example, maybe consider coming out to them via email or text, or even if it's important to you to do it in person, do it in a public place so people can be there to help you if needed. Hopefully no bystander effect, but that's another story.
Yeah, fair to say.
What do you
Well,
think about if it was an uncomfortable thing? What would you think about something like writing a letter where they might find it, where they're likely to find it, and then
Yeah,
getting the hell out of Dodge for a few hours and then coming back?
absolutely.
Is that something that's valid?
Absolutely. I mean, there are 1,000,001 ways to come out. It's really up to you.
Right on.
which I go back and forth, and people I think have heard me kind of wring my hands and clutch my pearls on this show before, around the topic of National Coming Out Day, because I love that there is a vehicle for particularly queer youth that are maybe looking for an opportunity to share themselves at school or with their family, and these different things. And I think that it can be really powerful having that communal support when you choose to come out. At the same time, I can't help but feel like it really feeds into this narrative that coming out is like a rite of passage, particularly for queer folks, and this idea that only queer folks have to come out. How do you react? How do you navigate all of that?
Well, I love the idea of National Coming Out Day, and the main reason is because it centers these sorts of conversations. I know many people in my personal and professional life who have used this day as like a means of coming out and set it as a goal and, worked the rest of the year to get to that point to where they can do that. And I think it's really encouraging and can help people feel less alone in doing so, and people are more readily able to like offer support because people know that people will be doing that, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But I don't know about coming out as a rite of passage. It depends what that means. I don't believe that coming out necessarily has to be a negative experience.
No, that's fair to say. It can definitely be a challenge, and it's one where the I think our queer audience and our atheist audience really overlaps, which is significant. I've kind of shared this story a couple of times on this show, so I'll keep it brief. But I didn't honestly feel like it was a priority to come out in a number of different ways to my family. I was kind of alienated from a lot of folks and had kind of gone through a transition with a lot of my friends. And so when I was asked to be on an ACA show where they just kind of hit me with a bunch of questions about who I was and what I believed and everything else, I kind of answered freely and then had the opportunity to share that video on my Facebook. And it was amazing the significance or the strength of the reactions I got. I don't think I expected people to have such strong feelings with regards to my religious beliefs or any of these other things. And it's amazing the way people can be kind of possessive over somebody else's identities, especially when we're talking about family.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I
When
mean,
you
I
say
think that,
strong, do you mean strong good or strong bad?
It was a mixture in my personal
Okay.
experience. It was honestly a lot of kind of hemming and hawing and being like, really? So that's what you think? That's what, and it wasn't a lot of aggression pointed towards me, but it also wasn't warm. The thing that really surprised me was just the number of people who didn't even like interact with anything that I had shared online, but who reached out to me personally about it later. I mean, I heard from all of my parents. I heard from ex-girlfriends and all kinds of different people. It was pretty surprising, actually.
Hmm. Wow. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
oh no, you're good. But what I was going to say is that I think coming out, it's often a mixed bag. Um, and oftentimes it's weird the way it plays out. Somebody that you thought would accept you doesn't, and somebody thought you wouldn't does. There's just no real way to predict that sometimes, I think. And I think that can be a barrier for a lot of people to coming out, is that not knowing. Because our brain, when we don't know something, our brain likes to make things up in place of that to fill that hole. And a lot of times we make a lot of assumptions, which ends up preventing us from doing what we want to do.
Yeah,
Fair to
that
say.
is so absolutely true. Like for when I came out as an atheist, it was a far more devastating and disappointing blow for my family than when I came out as gay. They really didn't even care at that point. I mean, I was in my late 20s at that point, but when I became an atheist in my early teens, I mean, that rocked their world. And that was such a big deal. And like because of that, I think that probably led me to maybe put the other thing back in my pocket, so it wasn't like a double whammy. And
Sure.
so I did just kind of keep it from them for years and years. So yeah, that really hits home for me too.
Yeah, well, sorry to hear it. On that note, though, Nate, I'd love it if you could take a look at the phones and see who we've got on the line. Who would you like to start with tonight?
Well, we have Alex from New York, and let's get Alex in here. If we can get him in, we've got Alex from New York looking for some advice on talking to family and getting family to use your proper pronouns. Alex, did I sum that up? Welcome, you're on live.
Essentially, yes. You got it down packed.
Perfect. So tell us what's going on, man.
So my family is very religious. I'm very not. Quite the opposite, actually. And they
Welcome to the party.
essentially don't.
Yeah.
Fun, right? It's even better.
Yeah,
when
no,
you're
it's not
studying
so much
basic
fun. We
stuff.
can all relate. Go ahead.
It's essentially they don't use my proper pronouns or even my preferred name, so it's just kind of irritating at times. They use gender roles, and it just irritates me, and I just really don't know how to tell them to stop. I mean, I could just tell them to stop, but like, I don't want to sound too harsh. They're my family.
Of
Yeah,
course.
and how that stop is going to be received carries a lot of weight, doesn't it? What kind of insights do the two of y'all have here?
Well, I think that first of all, when you're presenting someone with some new information, like I no longer want to be referred to as he or as she, and I prefer they. I think when you're presenting new information, you may want to give them a little bit of a break so that they can come around and get used to it. I don't think you owe it to them to do that, but I think it, like you say, they are your family, and you might want to throw them that little bit of extra room to get used to it. That being said, I mean, if you have told them and you've corrected them and they've made a mistake, and people make honest mistakes. I've done it myself. I still do it every now and then. But if they're misgendering you, you need to kind of determine whether it is intentional or whether it's a slip of the tongue. And I think the best way to do it is just to simply ask them, right? Like, did you just call me he on purpose, or do you just not care that I go by they? And then that's going to kind of be a good dowsing rod for where to go in the conversation from there.
So
I'm
I
gonna
have
piggyback
I actually came out about 8 months ago-ish, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more. I haven't really been keeping track. Roughly 8 months ago. So I've given
Time
it-
is a flat circle during COVID. I don't think any of us even knows how long ago 8 months ago was.
When you originally informed them of your proper name and pronouns, what was that like? What did you tell them?
I kind of played it subtly at first, gave them slow hints, kind of like how I did with my atheistic viewpoints and my other viewpoints that I definitely don't share with them. And it was a slow progress, but they were very accepting, but a little passive aggressive about it.
What did that
I'm in this
Tell us what
weird
that looks like.
situation-
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, how do you be
Sorry.
very accepting and a little passive aggressive? What did that look like for you?
So it's just difficult because I can't really remember off the top of my head. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. I mean, it sounds like it was kind of
I
a varied experience that was maybe strung out over some time, but that you formed a
Yeah.
memory and you've been kind of carrying a recollection of it. Yeah.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
And that's fair too. I mean, passive aggressive behavior by nature is subdued and sort of under the table, underhanded sort of. So I can understand it might be hard to pin down.
So this is not the first time they do this. My mother was and still is in basically a pseudo cult, aka Pentecostalism, Christian Pentecostalism, which is very cult-like in their teachings and their, actions.
Yeah, it definitely can be.
So
You don't have to tell me, Alex. I grew up in a very Pentecostal family.
Heard.
yeah, it's bad. It can get very bad.
I completely understand.
Do you know, Alex, what assertiveness is?
Assertiveness, yes.
Yeah.
I have been since studying a lot of Levain Satanism and watching a lot more atheistic videos on YouTube. I've been able to be a lot more assertive about myself and about my standpoints. There's just some things that I'm not able to do with my mother and father that I just have been able to do with, people online and my wife, my father-in-law, stuff like that.
And so do you feel like if you were assertive with your parents that would be harsh? I know you would express that as a concern.
I don't want to be too harsh. I don't want to cause them to view me in a disrespectful, dismissive light. Even
So
though
I've
they're
got
going
a
to do it anyways, but that's a whole different issue.
I've got a formula for you in terms of having this conversation. Basically, just a quick overview of it is it goes, I feel blank when blank. I'd prefer if blank. And so you could say, I feel upset, hurt, and disrespected when I'm called by the incorrect name and pronouns. I'd prefer if you used the name blank and XYZ pronouns. And that's not harsh. That's just a matter of fact. And in that, you're describing how you feel, which somebody really can't argue with how you feel.
Yeah, I love that nonviolent communication strategy for approaching this conversation. How does that resonate with you, Alex?
I could definitely try that. I'll definitely be open to trying that.
Cool.
Yeah, how comfortable is it for you to own those labels in that way? To really take ownership and say, like, I am this and I feel that.
Oh, I am very prideful in how I feel, how I act, and how I put off to myself. I take my pride as one of my number one qualities.
Well, fair enough. It sounds like you're all set up. Is there anything else that we might be able to clear up for you tonight?
No, I'm pretty good. I appreciate it greatly, guys. I really do.
Hey,
Yeah.
Thanks so much for calling in.
Thank you, Alex. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Being assertive is not being rude. There is a huge difference there. And you sound like you have a pretty good base to approach this with confidence. So if you want to call back and let us know how it works out, we would love to hear from you again. Okay.
Will do.
All right. Thank you for calling, Alex. You have a wonderful evening.
You
Awesome.
Bye.
Awesome. Well, we are at that point in the show. Let's go ahead and roll that promo.
Which I didn't actually mention this to you earlier, Puck, but this is kind of interesting because they are monogamous until the opportunity strikes to not be monogamous.
if this is really what people want to see, and if this is what people really engage with, why am I trying to be all prim and proper? Drink my mug of orange soda with my pinky up, right?
It's basically bikini bottoms. I'm not gonna go in full details with the measurement. Basically, it's booty shorts with your cheeks out.
John is making a crazy face there with that ukulele. I am worried about his well-being, but I'm sure he's fine.
For the 19th time in a row, yes, I know that I'm leading people away from God. I've been doing it for a long time. I love leading people away from a God that nobody has demonstrated exists.
And that's rapidly becoming my favorite part of the show. I love everything that our incredible team has put together, and I hope that everybody out there is loving all of these shows, because those are some really incredible moments.
I love our highlight reel. It's so good.
Yeah, I feel like you and I are on our way to like an escalating war of obnoxiousness to see who can get the best soundbite in each and every week. So now that we're both here, it's in competition.
All right. Oh, it's on. It's on like Donkey Kong, Christy, and you going down.
Well, getting back to the conversation, I know we've talked about safety as probably the most important concern, but I'd love to check in about any other sort of general advice you have, Noah, about how people can come out, particularly maybe when you're coming out to like an individual person. And I guess that's true whether we're talking about our kinks, which we covered in great detail on an episode a couple of weeks ago with Amberly, or talking about atheism, which we discussed with Matt and Rudy a couple of months ago. We'll make sure to get links to both of those episodes. But whether we're talking about gender or any of these other pieces, Noah, what kind of tips do you have?
I've got a few. I'm going to start with a little disclaimer here.
Sure.
As a trans person, I hate when a cis person calls me brave. And because of that, I feel an avoidance to use this word. But just as an aside, the reason why a cis person calling a trans person brave is somewhat offensive is because it's because of that person's privilege that makes it that way, in my humble opinion. However, I don't think there's a better word to use given our society to describe what it takes to come out. So coming out is brave, and it definitely takes courage. I have a few different pointers for y'all. The first is there's never a good time to come out, but we have to make one. There's always going to be stressors happening in the world, happening within your family and friends' lives. That's not a reason not to come out. We've got to push past that and create the time, create the moment, despite those things. Another one is, you might feel physically unable. Your body might try and fight back the words, but don't let that stop you. Stand firm. Your family and friends might give you pushback. Don't let anyone talk you out of who you are and what you need. When coming out, this is a plan that I try and do with my clients as well, and it can be used for any sort of stressful event. And basically what it involves is coming up with a plan for the things that you need to do to take care of yourself before, during, and after the event. So maybe before you make plans with friends for later that day after you expect to come out, maybe during you have, maybe, what are they called? Maybe you have a fidget that you use while you're coming out, or some sort of like emotional security animal, or something you can, just engaging your senses a little bit to soothe you. And then after, rally the supports, go out, well, maybe not now because of COVID, do something that's going to distract you, play video games, whatever the case may be. But don't just allow yourself to sit alone in your apartment or wherever you are without getting any support. So setting yourself up for success by making sure you're doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. Another one is one I had mentioned earlier, is if you feel unsafe coming out to somebody in person, consider a text or email. And then if it's important to you, because it is important for some people to come out to their loved ones in person. And I want to reiterate this: if that is the case and a person has a history of aggression, then really please do consider doing it in a public place. There's a lot of positives and potential negatives to coming out, but to me, the consequences of not coming out weigh much more heavily. And Christy, if it's okay with you, I'd like to take a second to review what some of those potential consequences of not coming out are.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So what this looks like varies for everyone, right? But there are some common consequences I have seen to not coming out. And that includes things like low self-esteem and self-efficacy, forced inauthenticity in relationships resulting in a lack of connection, feeling alone, lonely, and perhaps even increasing isolative behavior because you always feel on alert for threats, right? Inability to self-actualize, inability to participate in sexual relationships in a way that feels safe. And then there's always the potential, and we know that the LGBTQIA+, especially the trans community, have a very high suicide rate. Regarding the trans community, the suicide attempt rate is 41%, which is astronomically high.
Wow. 41%. Wow.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out just anecdotally that my experiences in working in suicide prevention, even though trans folks make up maybe 1 to 2% of the population, kind of depending on how you measure it or where you look, that they were just everywhere in the work that I did during that. I really cannot stress this enough. It feels like one of those statistics or one of those ideas that we frequently see, but that we become really numb to. And I just would really love to leave the audience tonight with a awareness of how widespread and significant this problem is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if I could add another anecdote to your anecdote, because as we all know, the plural of anecdotes is evidence, right? Not. That's a joke, folks. But when I was working the helpline for recovering from religion, there were so many calls and chats that we would get that were from queer youth that just had nowhere else to turn to and no one better to ask. And like you say, we represent on the spectrum of humanity such a small percentage, yet the amount of traffic that we generate on the helpline is, I would say maybe a third of the chats we got was someone struggling with something to do with being on the LGBTQIA spectrum.
Yeah,
Mass
no doubt.
overrepresentation.
Yeah, and I feel like this narrative has died out, but it's worth acknowledging that for so long, statistics like that around suicide or some of these other concerns have been quoted as proof positive that being gay is bad for you, that being trans, that choosing to be trans is bad for you, or proof that it's a miserable lifestyle, or these different things. And I think that narrative, as much as it's maybe disappeared from like the TV shows that we watch and maybe the widespread narrative, still exists in a lot of people's minds, completely ignoring the trauma that is caused by folks that exist outside of the conventions that they're supposed to. And I hope that our audience tonight can recognize the microaggressions and the pressure and the strain that they may experience as out atheists, and imagine that as just a piece of what is so often experienced by so much of the queer community.
I had a client tell me once, Christy, and I think this about sums up my response to that narrative. A client once told me, "I don't fear being trans. I fear the effects of being trans."
Yeah. Well put.
Or to put it another way, being an asshole to trans people is far more harmful than being a trans person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there are just way more assholes than I think a lot of us realize. We might think it while we're driving, but the truth is these are still widespread issues. For all of the gains that we have made, you only have to look at the bills that are being pressed through your local state legislature to know that there is so much more work to be done. And part of that work, I think, is in being visible. I don't feel like anybody listening to this, again, is obligated, especially at the expense of their own safety, to be the tip of the spear. But it's worth recognizing that outside of the experience of coming out to your partner or to your like immediate family, that being out, whether it's as an atheist or any of these other identities that we're talking about in the workplace or with your broader family or with your peers, is incredibly important. Noah, do you have any particular tips on how to come out in that kind of more broad way for like people that you work with or people that are maybe outside of like your personal life?
hmm And I just want to say that, that's why I strongly believe in being out professionally. And that's why it's important to me, is because, I mean, how many other trans or non-binary therapists are in town? I mean, maybe a handful, right?
Sure.
And, I think it's important to, especially for like the youth that I see, to have a positive mentor or role model who is like them. I mean, who has shown that you can be trans and be a professional. You can be trans and own your own practice and help people. You can be trans and educate people, and you can live a fulfilled life. So that's why being out is really important to me. But regarding workplaces can be a little tricky. One thing I recommend doing is rallying allies that you have, any coworkers at work, supervisors, etc. Get them together for additional support before you come out. Like, say you're out to a couple coworkers, but you're not out to like the company as a whole. Get those couple of coworkers behind you. I would start by talking to your direct boss or supervisor who can guide you in navigating that in your particular workplace. If you don't feel safe with your direct boss or supervisor, then I would definitely recommend getting HR involved to assist you in navigating that in the workplace and to help hold people accountable who might be shitty. Family is tough, especially if you have a conservative family. The conversations we have with others don't necessarily have to be long and in depth. I think it is one thing about coming out that a lot of people don't realize is it doesn't have to be a like 3-hour long conversation that you have where you just spill everything. And, it doesn't have to be like that. It can just be like, hey, mom, thought you should know I'm trans, And I want our listeners to keep in mind too, and I think Nate, you talked about this a little bit earlier. If we're coming from a more conservative family, sometimes we have to give our family space to process and grieve. I know it sounds a little silly, but I want to remind people when this happens, that doesn't mean anything about you, but rather it's their grief surrounding their preconceived ideas of who they wanted you to be.
Good point. Good point.
It's really important to keep that in mind. Your family has their own separate journey from yours. At times it'll intersect, but it's important to conceptualize them as separate. I would encourage your family to seek their own support through therapy or support groups.
All right. Well, we've got a little bit of lag with Noah. We'll work on getting that cleared up. But Nate, I'm just curious how all of this is grabbing you. What your experiences looked like coming out, and if any of this would have maybe changed things for you.
Well, I kind of wanted to, excuse me, I kind of wanted to offer a layperson's experience coming out in a completely different workplace than what well, than what you two are used to.
Sure. Yeah. No,
But
as he was talking about like getting HR involved in these different things, it definitely made me curious about what your workplace might look like or what some of these other situations might entail.
well, for those who don't know, I'm a tradesperson. I'm a subcontractor, so I build things for a living. So it's it's a construction site with all the normal stereotypes that come along with construction types. Yes, folks, they're all true. Okay, not all of them, but most of them are true. So as an out man myself, I know I've shown my hot pink hard hat on the show before, but I I make an effort to not hide it, but I also make an effort not to go out of my way to tell people. So when I started this new job with a new company a few months ago, I didn't immediately go in and announce, "Hey, my husband's name is James," and like, yeah, I don't look or sound gay, but hey, look at my hot pink hard hat. I just let it come up organically. So when they were asking about my fiance, then I would just use the he pronoun, and then I don't think they really said anything the first time, but they kind of like, huh? And they don't want
you
to
get
they
a
don't
lot
want to
of the
say
head
anything
cock.
the
Sure.
first time, but then the next time I refer to him with his proper name. And then over time it just comes out, and then you could just be like, yeah, my partner's a man. It's 2021, dude.
Yeah, it happens.
You know?
No, I appreciate that effort to be transparent and to be, sort of out and proud, but also to normalize all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was telling you, actually, I think before I went on my vacation, about a new person that we had working for us. And this, I think, is quite prescient to this conversation, because
Yeah,
I
please.
could tell that when people were referring to them as a she, that it was bothering them. I could just, they do the little fast blink, and you could just, there was a change in the body language. And so when I had a moment to take them aside, I just
People wonder how all the queer folks at parties find one another. That's how we find one another. Is just
yeah.
noticing that little like,
Yeah, exactly. And like Noah was saying, you don't necessarily want to correct them every single time. And I'm sure this person didn't want to go out of their way to correct a bunch of burly construction types on their first day on the job.
Sure.
Right. But so I asked them when I got some time alone, because I was trading them, and I asked them, do you go by she? I noticed you didn't really respond. Like, is it she? And they look at me, and then I think they were expecting some sort of crass lesbian joke, and I'm like, no, like your pronouns, like, do you go she, or is it they? I want to get it right. And they said, actually, I do go by they, but thank you for asking. And then over the course of the next few days, I wasn't really sure if we were going to, like, do they want me to tell the other guys to go by to say they? Do they not want to be singled out? Do they not want to be the object of ridicule? Like, do I even ask? Like, do I seem patronizing and like part of the patriarchy if I'm like trying to watch out for this person when they don't need my ass to watch out for them? They're doing just fine on their own. But eventually I did end up asking, and they said that no, they didn't want me to make a point of saying it to anyone. And if that's what they're comfortable with in the workplace, that's fine. At least they know that their crew foreman, who is me, is a queer man who will shut that shit down if any of it comes up on the job site.
Yeah, and I appreciate you wanting to support them and like learning this about them, while also being mindful of the fact that once you've been let in, it's still not your information to share, especially in a unsafe world. It kind of breaks certain rules of etiquette in our minds to continue to maybe contribute to this person being closeted or not being able to be transparent. But I think that we need to be smarter than that and recognize that this is still a very dangerous world oftentimes, and that folks with divergent gender identities or any of the adjectives that we're talking about tonight have a right and maybe even a safety need to keep a lot of those things quiet.
Oh yeah, especially for trans folks. Like, yeah, I mean, I might be the subject of a few jokes behind my back, and they might throw around some 6-letter F words when I'm not around to listen to them, but I'm not gonna get, beaten to death or stabbed, or it's far less likely for me as a gay man than it is for a trans person. So it's absolutely understandable that they would want to fly under the radar, and
Yeah.
if that's what makes them comfortable, hell, I don't blame them.
Fair to
No,
say.
you're back.
I made it.
You made it back.
My internet sucks.
Yeah, I feel that. Welcome to that 2021 energy. But you were kind of talking about this, but I wanted to sort of lay it out. How much slack really should we give our family and our friends when it comes to respecting the things that we've shared with them? I mean, Alex kind of asked this, and I know that you were talking, Noah, about giving a little bit of grace and a little bit of patience. Nate, you spoke earlier about sort of recognizing the difference between a human mistake and maybe like a malicious attack. But at the end of the day, it can be really painful when you have shared your identity with somebody and they continued or refuse to acknowledge it. So how much space do we give people when they misuse our pronouns or dead name us in those ways?
So I think, as is the case with most answers to these questions, it really depends. If somebody is actively making an effort, maybe cut them a little more slack than somebody who is making no effort at all. And what that might look like is somebody, accidentally using the wrong name or pronouns and then like proactively correcting themselves, right? Like that would be somebody who's making an effort. However, if somebody is purposely using the incorrect pronouns as a way of trying to harm you, setting a boundary around that not being okay, calling out the behavior can be helpful. And if somebody persists and continues to try and be intentionally harmful, I would just seriously reconsider my relationship with that person. And if this person is somebody that you have to be around because it's like a coworker and we don't have control of those sorts of things, get your direct supervisor and or HR involved. I mean, I think self-advocacy here is the big thing. And I know, a lot of people will offer to or will try to, we use the term pray the gay away, right? If somebody wants to pray for you, let them. No harm, no foul. But you can set a boundary that you don't want to hear about it or be involved with it.
Yeah, I think that that's a really valuable distinction because we do often in this community get that very passive aggressive, like, oh, we love you, we just hate your sins, and we're going to be praying for you, and it's fine for people to believe some of that stuff when it's not hurting others, but it's frankly hurting to be talking about it. So what advice do you have for like setting and maintaining some of those boundaries?
Regarding setting and maintaining boundaries, well, there's that little nifty formula that I gave earlier. The I feel blank when blank, I prefer if blank. And that can often get the conversation going. Be sure to use I statements, because when we use wording like you did this to me and I didn't like that, that can come off as accusatory and causes people to get on the defensive. Be persistent. If, for example, you are setting a boundary around your name and or pronouns, and someone mistakenly misnames or misgenders you, after you've already had this initial conversation, it doesn't have to be a big conversation every time.
Yeah. Are there any warning signs that you might highlight for us when those boundaries aren't really in the place that they need to be? I know oftentimes we can say like, no, it's okay. I don't necessarily want to bother anybody. And we can kind of find ourselves getting pushed and pushed and pushed. how do we prevent that from happening, or just notice that it's happening?
Well, if we've previously set a boundary and we still aren't getting what we want and need, then it may be helpful to consider being more specific in future conversations. So, for example, there's a big difference between saying, I'd like it if we spent more time together, versus I'd like it if we had contact once a week. You catch my drift?
Sure.
So if you haven't been direct and specific about your boundaries, and if you have been, direct and specific about your boundaries and they still aren't being respected, to me, that's information about the relationship such that you might reconsider how much time and the extent to which you're involved with this person.
Sure. Well, I want to give you just a moment, Noah, if I could, to take a look at your microphone and work with our crew to see if we can get your sound improved just a little bit. But I wanted to really hear from both of you about just how much education we should be expected to give the people in our lives. You know, if somebody has questions about our neurodiversity or about our, religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs, or about our gender identities and these different things, to what extent are we kind of obligated or expected to share some of these ideas with them?
Personally, for me, I think when it comes to sexual identity, you don't know anybody's shit, right? You're not the Oxford Dictionary, you're not the internet, and the internet is out there and everybody's got it. So if you're really curious, go educate yourself, right? I'm not your professor, I'm not your mama. So go figure it out for yourself. When it comes to atheism, when I get questioned on it, I almost always preface the conversation with something along the lines of, I will have a frank conversation with you about this, but your feelings might get hurt. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but I may say some things that are going to make you angry, and you need to be ready for that. Okay? Because this isn't going to be a comfortable conversation if we're going to get into it. Do you want to have an uncomfortable conversation? I'll do it, but I'm just warning you that I may say some things that upset you and you might get mad.
Fair to say. Yeah, for my part, I usually have the benefit of doing so many of these types of episodes and conversations. Honestly, I was able to see my dad for the first time in a long time a couple weeks ago, and I sent him an interview that I did and was sort of like, if you got any questions about like my identity or whatever else, here's like a 45-minute primer. And I recognize that most people don't have that opportunity. So, Noah, what kind of advice would you have?
Well, I don't believe it's our responsibility to educate anybody, but if you have specific resources or information that you feel really speaks to your experience, it doesn't hurt to send it their way. The other thing is we want to make sure that the people close to us get the right information. And by doing this, it opens up the possibility of other more in-depth conversations in the future, if you want to have them. But as I previously said, there's a lot of misinformation on the internet, especially a lot of like conservative, religious thoughts and ideas about what it means to be LGBTQIA+. And so pointing your family and friends in the right direction where you've read through something, it speaks to you, you feel like it helps describe your experience to them, then definitely share it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Like you're not obligated to do it, but if it's somebody that you care about, your level of concern for them and their level of concern for you is probably going to correlate with how much you want to bring them up to speed, on where you're at, for sure. I think that's...
Well, and a nuance to this conversation that I don't know we need to get too deeply into, but it's worth pointing out that regardless of what adjectives we're using, atheist, autistic, bi, trans, whatever it might be in reference to, that those labels only go so far in actually describing us. So, to a certain extent, a lot of these conversations can be an opportunity to not just provide sort of general information about what it means to be non binary or any of these different things, but instead can be an opportunity to express who we are to that individual and to talk about our kind of personal experience.
Yeah. You know, I wanna mention something I didn't once when my internet went out. I
Sure.
wanted to say that if your family is unable to be supportive, it's up to you how you'd like to handle these relationships. But it can actually be more damaging to stay in them rather than to cut ties. Just because somebody is our parents doesn't mean that we can't set boundaries with them about how we expect to be treated. And if they can't respect these boundaries and this is harmful to you, it's okay to cut ties. People often feel that sense of obligation to their families and to their parents, especially. But you don't, like I started off this interview, you don't know anyone's shit.
Great notion to just continue to reinforce. At the same time, if you want to create a sense of community, if you want to be sort of out and proud and maybe visible to other folks who share some of these identities, what kind of tips do you have for signaling to others? Wearing our pronouns on our shirt, or like wearing an atheist T-shirt, or any of these kinds of things. Do you have any recommendations on how to navigate that space?
I mean, again, it really depends. I mean, there's a lot of trans people who choose to live their lives as what we call stealth, which basically means that they don't disclose the gender they were assigned at birth, which is just as okay as being out, It's a personal choice. I'm very upfront about my gender and disclose this everywhere, but I don't introduce myself as, oh, hi, I'm trans,
Sure.
Kind of like what I was saying. Yeah, for sure.
And so, and that's especially if I haven't assessed whether it's safe to do so, right? So context, I think, is very important. If you feel like people are better able to see you by signaling this in some way, then do it. That could be, a pronoun pin. That could be, a pride T-shirt. Whatever the case may be. Another interesting thing I was talking with my trans mass group about. I have a trans mass therapy group that meets every Wednesday, and one thing we talked about recently is how to still be seen within the LGBTQIA plus community when we have cisgender passing privilege, for example, in attending events such as Pride, which can involve things like wearing a trans flag, pin, whatever the case may be. There's all sorts, I love the internet because it is disseminating a whole lot of really cool trans related T-shirts. There's this shirt that I want to get that says self-made man. I'd love that. But there's a million different ways. And I think that community is so important, especially in the absence of family.
Sure. Yeah, community is important. And I'll say that since making the decision to, grow my hair out and change my name and paint my nails and these different things, that, as a able-bodied cis-ish male, I feel largely safe in most spaces, and I carry a lot of privilege. So I have some opportunities that a lot of other people don't. But I've also been incredibly thankful for those opportunities, because by painting my nails and these different things, people definitely respond to me differently. And particularly folks from my community make an effort to maybe kind of beeline it towards me. When I am at a party, it doesn't take a whole lot of like active intention for me to quickly find myself surrounded by, whatever other queer folks might be there. To the safety piece, I've definitely tried to scrape off that nail polish before going into certain truck stops and some things along those lines. So, it definitely is a mixed bag, but that's life in America in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, don't wear your pride pin or shirt to the NRA meeting,
Yeah, that is that's an important message, I think, for people to be willing to just kind of gauge and feel these things out. But otherwise, for folks who are maybe about to take that plunge or who are thinking about, opening up in these ways or sharing themselves in these ways, you mentioned the importance of having a plan and of having good support. I might mention here the value of working with a psychotherapist or a transition coach like yourself in order to find that support. But what are some other resources that you might recommend or point people towards?
Regarding coming out, I think the Trevor Project and the Human Rights Campaign both have some like coming out handbooks available online. PFLAG is a great resource not only for LGBTQIA folks but also their families. There is a organization called Gender Spectrum that also has support groups available online. And there's a wide variety of different options within Austin as well. But if you are struggling with coming out, please consider seeking therapy to provide you with the support as you move through that process. Coming out isn't necessarily a one conversation and done type of thing. It's kind of a decision you continue to make on a daily basis.
No, that's fair to say, and it's worth maybe kind of encouraging people to steel themselves that once you like take off that bandage, it can be a really exhausting ongoing process. And perhaps at first it's raw pride. And then after the first week and the second week and the third month and on, it can start to be very exhausting. So having that plan in place, having that support in place is going to be important, not just for that first day, but for a kind of ongoing and potentially exhausting experience.
It definitely takes, I mentioned courage and bravery earlier, but I think managing our patience can be tested quite often. And, if things don't go well initially with somebody that you come out to, like we talked about earlier, like give it a little time too.
Mm-hmm. Well, fair to say, before Nate starts to take us out for tonight, did you have any final words that you wanted to make sure to leave with the audience?
Oh boy. There's just so much to say about this topic, and I feel like we just barely scratched the surface tonight. But if you're considering coming out and would like some support, I'm licensed in the state of Texas, and I'd be honored to work with you through that and support you through that. There's no shame in having help. I think that is the message I would like to leave on tonight is, be sure that you have supports in place who are going to be there for you through this process.
Yeah, terribly important to say. Well, I know we've got some links and things for people who want to find you. Nate, walk us through it.
All right. Noah is a psychotherapist and transition coach there in Texas. Look at that handsome mug. NextQuest Counseling, folks. Look him up. And also, there we go. Also, if you're looking for more of this content, you can find all of the ACA's content at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. All of our different shows on there, the nonprofits and Truth Wanted, AXP, a one-stop shopping center for all things atheism and mismings. So check us out, folks. It's a hub. And if you're looking for maybe some peer support, right? Professional help is great, but peer support can be helpful too. The Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group is there for fans, by fans. I'm there. Christy's there. We're all there. So, if you just want to drop something anonymously, or if you just want to ask a question, get the layperson's view, get a thumb on the community, come in and give us a call.
I think there's real value in finding community just in something as simple and stupid as queer memes or atheism memes, or just knowing that there are other people like you having these same experiences. just being able to kind of scroll through your feed and recognize that, oh, other people are having that same kind of challenge, that same kind of idea. I cannot overstate how impactful that has been for my own experience. And I definitely encourage folks who maybe are stuck in a closet in a lot of different ways to engage with those types of connections online.
Mm-hmm. And there's another community that you can also look into, the ACA Discord, the official, unofficial Discord server of the atheist community of Austin. I'm on there. I know a lot of the other hosts are on there, and there are some great folks on there, some great moderators. There's an entire channel for gender and sexuality issues, and I happen to know quite a few of the mods and the admins, one of which was even on the show back a little while ago. So if you're looking for some more online community, if you're looking for some more anonymity and you don't necessarily want to use your Facebook profile, or if you just want to talk to other atheists, tiny.cc/ACA Discord. Also, if you're looking for some merch, we've got merch and coffee cups and t-shirts and all sorts of bumper stickers. I think we have bumper stickers at bit.ly/AEN merch. I say, oh, that is a sticker. And you can put it on your car. You can put it on your Xbox. You can put it on your gun safe. You can put it on your aquarium, although I wouldn't recommend it on the aquarium. Yes, bit.ly/AEN merch. Buy a t-shirt, folks. And finally, but definitely not least,
most important part of the night.
The most important part of the night. The folks who do all the work so that dummies like me can sandwich between two mental health professionals and listen to them riff for an hour and change. Hey, crew. How you guys doing? Oh, they're so cute. Look at the puppers. Oh, my gosh. Well, I will take a substitute for the crew cat with a crew puppers.
Yeah, no, that's an upgrade. Don't tell anybody I said that, but it's a strong upgrade.
Oh, it's out there now. You're never going to make the highlight reel now, Christy.
Oh, that's fair to say. Well, with all of that being said, thank you both for being here so much. Noah, I really appreciate the work that you do, and I hope that there are folks out there listening who are maybe thinking that right now might in fact be the time to actually kind of take the plunge and to start this process. And wherever you are, I hope that you are working through that plan, that you're being intentional, that you're being safe, and that you're getting support from your community and from great professionals like Noah. So thank you all both for being here. Thank you everybody for watching. And for now, let me encourage each of you to go out and give yourself a big old orgasm, or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.